Hey guys, in this video, I'm going to show you what's new in OTR version 2 from version 1. So let's jump in. Right now, you are looking at the OTR version 2 user interface. You'll notice from the get-go, there is a custom theme now. I'm really excited about this. It is a combination of Reaper's version 5 and version 6 themes, the best of each of those guys, as well as taking elements from other really popular themes that users have expressed their love for. I wanted to make sure that was accommodated in this particular theme, as well as a number of other customizations. Moving forward, you will need to be using the OTR version 2 theme to make use of all the features in OTR 2. Without going into too much detail, the short version is that I have embedded a lot of the workflow into the theme itself. That allows you to do things like remove the track prefixes and track suffixes. I'll get into that in just a minute, but let's go ahead and cover some of the features of the theme. So one of the really awesome features is that the theme itself has really subtle but nice cues, visual cues as to what the types of tracks are. So you can see these gray tracks are group tracks. These were previously the VIC tracks in OTR version 1. You'll notice that a fader does not pop up on the left-hand side. These guys, you do have routing capability. You do have the ability to mute and solo them. But, you know, the intention was never that these are some way to control the audio. They are more just grouping tracks. So they have a visual cue. The other tracks throughout the template carry similar types of visual cues that let you know what they are. All the tracks have some type of icon on them now. So you'll notice that and they're very subtle. You'll see like an info icon, a video icon, a folder icon. You do have the traditional active, disabled, stem, and frozen icons. So those carry through. You also have new icons that indicate if a track is a MIDI track. So for example, let's just add one into this section. And you will see that this particular track template would have previously been called a VIM track in OTR 1. It's just an instrument track with 16 MIDI channels routed, and it has all the MIDI icon down the side. So it's got a very easy cue to let you know what the type of track or what type of track it is. That's something that's been missing in Reaper. It's missing in a lot of DAWs actually, but it kind of helps you keep track of what's going on your screen at once. The cues with the routing, these are a part of the Reaper version 6 theme. They have a very simple indication as to whether these are tracks that route up to a master track. So the short version is that everything that you do in OTR tends to have very subtle but easy to recognize visual cues. That was something I worked really hard to make sure was consistent. The actual tracks themselves, again, they have this very subtle appearance to them, but they've got beautiful meters from the Reaper version 6 theme. You do have the full flexibility of the text fields, so you can grow your track size as long as you want with as long of a track name as you want. Those are things from like the Reaper version 5 theme that I loved. A number of the elements that are, I would call it the best of both worlds, have made it into this. So like faders on the track, they've got a very subtle appearance to them, but they fit very nicely in the theme. You don't want to have too active of a section on the left-hand side and not be able to focus on what you're actually doing on the music side. So that's part of it. Okay, so you'll notice the theme has a certain appearance. One of the things that I touched on a second ago was that you no longer have to rely upon prefixes and suffixes in OTR version 2. This is huge. It's something I did not want to put in OTR version 1, but there was no way around it. Previously, you would have had to have every track with a prefix that let OTR know what to do with it. Was this an instrument track? Was it a category track? Was it a MIDI track, an output track? And so you no longer have to deal with that now. That's all handled behind the scenes. When a track is active or disabled or frozen, you no longer have the suffix that gets added to it. So for example, if I disable this track, the icon indicates the status, but you don't have any additional text information that goes onto the track itself. So that's a really great feature. Moving on, one of the big questions I had from the very beginning with OTR, and I actually ended up having to customize the theme for a number of big composers that had specific workflows where people wanted to change the categories of the OTR project from the 23 hard-coded categories that were in there. So for example, there was like a strings, a solo strings, a brass, a solo brass section. OTR version 2 improves upon that by allowing the full customization of all of your track names. Now, you don't handle them as you would a traditional track where you change the name. You don't just come in here and change it here. I have included a new GUI where you can click on it, and it allows you to change all the names of the different categories. You now have up to 32 categories from the previous 23. You also have 8 roll-up groups for stems. Previously, there were 6. So this allows users to completely customize what their groups are, and then you can just click in here and OTR will automatically route all these guys where they need to go. So that is a really awesome feature, a big time saver. Your VCAs also mirror this process as well. So there's nothing else you have to do. It's just you go into the OTR configuration manager, you're good to go. If you have loaded up an OTR version 1 template in OTR version 2, when you click on this guy for the first time, it will prompt you and say, hey, we need to convert your template. Would you like to do this? And you say yes. And it converts everything over to make it work within OTR version 2. Also stripping out prefixes from tracks, stripping out suffixes from tracks, leaving you full creative control as to what you want to do from a naming convention standpoint. So that's a really awesome feature. That introduced an interesting dilemma. So if every project can have a fully customized workflow, how could I provide the users an ability to still have the menu system work for all potential workflows? And what do I mean by that? Well, previously in OTR version 1, you had these visibility toggles at the top of the screen here. You had render toggles. Basically, for OTR's workflow, the idea was show and hide as many things and in many ways as possible. Render your tracks as quickly as possible with the touch of a button. It's all done for speed. Well, the dilemma was, if you can customize anything in the world for these tracks, how do I make the tracks work for all end users? So if you look at the top of the screen, you're probably rolling your eyes a bit and going, man, VIC 01, 02, I'm going to have to know what these do with generic names. Well, not necessarily. And let me tell you why. So even though the tracks themselves do follow a naming protocol, once you have gotten into the configuration manager, once you've saved these, they will indicate on the left-hand side the stem category, and it will also indicate the group. So you would be able to understand VIC1 or in the visibility. So that would toggle this particular track because it's VIC1. And if you wanted to render the group tracks and such, you could come into here and you'll see it says group 01, group 02. Anyway, back to what I was saying. From the visibility side, this is still not a very we'll call it cozy. I like that word. It's not a very cozy feeling for a workflow. It feels very stale, very generic, very rigid. Less rigid than OTR version 1, which was something you couldn't edit. It was just something you had to use. So I built in these buttons here to the left that allow you to click on them and have OTR tailor itself to your particular project. So this was the ultimate solution. You click on the button, it's going to prompt you to customize the menus. You hit yes. And it says, okay, you must restart. This is the only little catch here, but once you restart Reaper, you'll notice that from the very beginning that the menu system, we haven't even loaded our project, but it has already tailored the menu system to what we just told it to. And so now, when we're operating our template, we know that when we want to, let's go ahead and hide everything. If we want to show the brass section, we can just click on that. The string section, it will show solo strings. And each of the menu buttons is tailored specifically to what we named it. Now, if you have a separate type of naming convention categories in a different project, you'll need to re-click this button and make sure that the menus update themselves for your project. So that's not a real-time feature. It is a passive feature, meaning you must punch a button and restart Reaper, and then it will do its thing. But it is a nice feature. So that being said, moving down the list, I have added an additional menu for a new color palette. This one is very bright and poppy, but also has some dull options. You still have the OTR version 1 color palettes, but you have this OTR version 2 color palette. So, I know a lot of people tend to like real bright colors for their instruments so they know exactly what's going on the screen. If we were to just record something real briefly, you can see that the items themselves are real bright as well. So let me minimize that. Let's record a number of things. Okay, so you get the idea. Real bright, colorful, looks great. You can choose any of these colors. You can still do the custom colors as well in Reaper. There is an entirely new menu system within OTR because of all of the removal of prefixes and suffixes. I have reorganized and stripped down the menu system to be able to provide you the most efficient way of getting track templates. You now have audio tracks, group tracks, utility tracks, virtual instruments. This last one is for me. That's my own stuff. But within each of these categories, very simply, you're recording music, pick an audio track. If you are going to want a group folder, I give you 2 different options here. They serve the same function. They just have a little bit different cosmetics to them. Utility tracks, this is where you can add a traditional FX track, a MIDI track, any of the additional things like the video track, the OTR info track, which is at the very beginning of the template. From the virtual instrument side, and this is where most of you guys will spend your time, there's a section that's blank, a section that says Rearticulate, which we're about to get into. I'm really excited about it. And then the sampler section. Now, assuming you own the samplers, and you have them installed on your system, when you use these templates, they'll automatically load into OTR, which is really cool. You've got engine contact. You now have 2 new options within contact, and that is to make use of the Flex Router plugin that the developer of Rearticulate also created. That plugin, it allows you to make use of all 64 channels in contact rather than just the 16. More on that in another video, but the short version of that is that instead of having to set up Flex Router for your instruments, and then if you want to tie that in with Rearticulate and how to get those 2 to talk, OTR covers all that for you. It's all pre-built. So if you were to select Contact Flex Router CC117 and go ahead and load it up, it will already have Flex Router preloaded in up here. We can look at it, and it has all the information already set up. So you may be asking why you need that. If you're asking that now, that's for another video. But again, it allows you to make use of all 64 channels in contact versus 16. So that's a really awesome feature. That menu flyout system, going back really quickly. Also, I've added Synchron Player and Vienna Ensemble Pro. I've given some new templates for that. Each of the templates inside of the samplers and virtual instruments, they're very similar to OTR version 1, but they have been simplified with naming conventions. I stripped out what used to be called the orchestral hall and the choir hall and just gave them generic names to Virtual Hall 1 to Virtual Hall 2. The majority of you guys are probably just going to go output to stereo outs. I mean, I've used all these variations in my workflow, which is why they're here, but I tend to go out the stereo outs and use traditional reverb practices in my workflow. So I imagine most of you guys will follow that same process. Okay, so now we're getting into the fun stuff. One thing that you would notice is that I have this Rearticulate section here. Within the Rearticulate section, you're able to go ahead and load in an instrument such as Contact, and it will preload Rearticulate on the track itself. Trying to zoom in up there in the top left corner. And that will mean that you don't have to add it to the track. It's already set up. OTR comes pre-configured with Rearticulate, additional plugins through the Reapack add-on that you can get. And so from an articulation manager standpoint, it's probably my number one question that I get from users is, when are you going to just put Rearticulate in here so you don't have to set it up? So here you guys go. I'm really excited about it. It's actually changed with my workflow, how I approach my templates. So I'll be showing off some of that in a bit as well. But one of the things that came up with Rearticulate along the way is that while Rearticulate is amazing at what it does, provides way more flexibility with the potential articulation mapping methods compared to Logic and Cubase and such. The one issue that it kind of has is that when you go to edit, this is my floating Rearticulate window over here. When you go to edit your Reabank, which is basically the text file of data for your articulations, Rearticulate would require you to manually go in here and type in all of this type of information. So as you can see, that's a lot. It's boring. It has nothing to do with music. I mean, it gives you a workflow improvement at the end, but I mean, you're literally sitting down and just entering in tons and tons of data. And then you get down to the crazy stuff like this here at the end. And, you know, you look at one of these lines and you're kind of like, that kind of jumped on me there. Sorry. But you look at one of these lines and you're like, what does that even mean? @2 CC @2 77, 1. Like, what is that? And so it is kind of the Achilles heel of Rearticulate. Rearticulate has some great features, but it also has a requirement that the user has to have their own data input. I know Jason, the developer of Rearticulate, is working on something to improve that process. This Rearticulate still hasn't hit what he would call version 1 yet, so just bear with him on that process. But for me, I wanted to put it in. I wanted to workflow. So I created a Rearticulate GUI, and this is probably the most exciting feature to me. All the other stuff in OTR had to be created so I could get to this point to add Rearticulate this way. That may not make a lot of sense to people who are just thinking, oh, you just click and add a track. But there's so many underlying pieces of the process for the workflow that having all of these workflows integrated, Rearticulate, how it ties into Vienna Ensemble Pro and instruments on there, and if you have Flex Router inside of Contact, all of these things I had to consider in the development and architecture of OTR2. So let's look real quickly at the GUI editor. So from the beginning, you have a new menu at the very top, OTR Rearticulate Management. And what you're able to do is you have 4 icons. You have a new, which is blank, a blank project. You have a new from existing. So consider that as like a save as. You created something in the past that you like and you want to do something without having to recreate the wheel. So you open it, change a few things, click save as. You have an edit button and you have a delete button. So pretty straightforward. From the very beginning, I'm going to click new. And you're going to see this spreadsheet-like interface. You know what? I know it's not the prettiest thing. Just going to go ahead and put that out there. But it is what is possible with Reaper right now. I know that there are some things coming out in the future with Reaper that are going to allow for users to create very beautiful interfaces. There are going to be some resources to make that better. But between now and then, this is the interface that we have access to, or the tools that we have access to create the interface is a better way of saying that. So what you'll be able to see is you've got 16 slots for articulations, and then you have tabs at the top, which allow you to do these all the way up to the 128 articulations that are allowed for within MIDI and within Rearticulate. when you add an articulation, I've kind of limited a little bit about Rearticulate's capabilities. It has so many, but I put the ones that you can use 98% of the time. There is a 2% outlier, which I'll talk about. That's when you're dealing with multiple note holds, multiple key switches. It's rare, but I am going to work on a future improvement down the line. There is a solution that I have for that anyway right now. But this was trying to keep the most number of elements on the screen without getting chaotic, that allows you to do everything you need to do. You'll notice that there is the ability to choose the MIDI channel. You have up to 64. You may say, 64, how do I use all 64 MIDI channels? That's what I was talking about with Flex Router. If you have your instrument set up in Contact as a Flex Router instrument, when you are filling out your Rearticulate articulation, you choose, am I going to use a standard method, so you can only pick between the first 16 MIDI channels, or do we want to make use of Flex Router, one of these two methods, which this is not a how-to video, this is a what's new in OTR 2, but this allows you to choose which Flex Router method to use that won't interfere with your instrument's key switch and CC demands. So I've given you two options for that, but it's all built in. You're able to add up to 3 MIDI CC rules, a single key switch rule, and then a note hold rule. So that's, like Bohemian Violin, forces you to hold down a note when you change one an up bow or a down bow, or even if you want to change articulations. So you would use that. You can change your icon color from here. You can change your icon itself as well. I had to rely on the text names of these guys. If you need to reference what they actually are, you can go out to Rearticulate's website. There was not a way to do that within the programming tools I had access to. So one of the other things that OTR has is built-in templates. So if you are going to traditionally set up, say, 16 instruments within Contact on different MIDI channels, if you click on the OTR template, it will pre-fill all the information out. You just change the articulation name and you're good to go. You'll also notice that you have this active button down the side. You can turn them on and off if you want those articulations to make it into your final project. You can choose a folder path, tooltip, and what that will allow you to do is once an instrument's created, and I'm going to move over to this section, if I were to add the articulation to my instrument, you'll notice that Rearticulate has the factory sections, and then it also has a user section. And I've got this broken down to the OTR templates and then OTR user. I am in the process, just started, of a long and tedious process of setting up all my instruments for Rearticulate. You can look down this path and you can see a number of these guys here. If we were to look at, for example, Hans Zimmer strings, and let's just choose one of these guys, say that's what we were putting on this track, you'll see that they all show up and it's easy peasy. So if you wanted to create an articulation like this guy and didn't want to recreate the wheel, you can click the new from previous, and we're going to just select the Hans Zimmer strings 20 cellos, and you can see it's all loaded, and you can just save it as something else. Very easy again. Editing, same deal. Deleting out, same deal. So I've rambled a lot, but this is showing off all the new stuff in OTR 2. I'm really excited about it. Overall, OTR 1 went from about 300 scripts and actions to OTR 2 having almost 1,000 scripts and actions that power this thing. There will be some new things down the line. This new structure that I used for OTR 2 has allowed me to kind of set a very ambitious plan for future developments for my personal workflow, which will make it into future releases of OTR down the road. So I hope you enjoy seeing what's new in OTR 2. Thanks for watching.